Going back to Capitol tonight, ever since he took office back in January, there has been speculation that Governor Andrew Cuomo might be eyeing the White House in 2016. If true, he would be the latest in a long line of New York governors with presidential aspirations. But for every Franklin Roosevelt or Grover Cleveland, there's a Thomas Dewey or Charles Evans Hughes. Among those who didn't reach the White House is Al Smith, and tomorrow he'll be the feature of a C-SPAN panel discussion taking place right here in Albany. My next guest will be one of the panelists. He is former New York State Assembly historian John Evers. Thanks very much for your time, John.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You know, Al Smith is a very fascinating figure in New York State politics. He was an Assembly Speaker, he was a governor, and he was the first Catholic nominee by a major party for president in 1928. And he lost in a landslide.
Yeah. Smith was unique in many ways. He had a tremendous legislative career, 12 years in the Assembly. He was a Constitutional Convention delegate in 1915. He was sheriff of New York County, an interesting position, president of the Board of Aldermen of New York City, and then he became four-term governor of New York State. And he was nominated at the convention, the Democratic Convention, 4 times. He did win in 28, and as you mentioned, he got killed by, of all people, Herbert Hoover, who now we always vilify as one of the worst presidents of the United States.
Yeah, and Al Smith, and we were just talking before we started this, how Al Smith's reputation has been somewhat rehabilitated over the years. Ken Burns recently did a documentary on Prohibition. Smith was seen as kind of a hero in that documentary for somebody for opposing Prohibition, which is certainly a misguided policy. And also now Governor Andrew Cuomo, as he's working on this kind of right-sizing reorganization of state government, has actually hung Smith's portrait in the Red Room, which is the governor's ceremonial office. And that recalls back when Smith, when he was in office, started his own reorganization of state government 80 years ago. What can we learn from Al Smith's governorship and also his presidential campaign as well?
Well, probably key about Smith's governorship was that his years of being in the Assembly and his closeness to the legislature, he understood government. In fact, when he was elected in 1903 and took office in 1904, he thought after a few years, I might give this up. But then he came back to Albany and was a member of the Assembly for the next 12 years, and he learned government from the ground floor. He chaired Ways and Means. He worked his way through it. His right-sizing of government, and you mentioned Governor Cuomo has his SAGE Commission, it was to investigate government and find out how you can make it most responsive to the people. Smith didn't want to cut government. Smith wanted to right-size it. He wanted to make it more responsive to carry out the programs that he thought were in the best interest of people.
Right. And his 1928 presidential campaign, we mentioned that he was the first Catholic nominee. There was a lot of, there's been speculation, and looking back on it, that one of the reasons why he was blown out in that election was, at the time, religious bigotry. A lot of people thought he would be beholden to Rome and not the voters, which, you know, looking back on that now, we think of that as kind of a ridiculous argument.
Right.
But you see Mitt Romney running for president now, and he still faces questions over his Mormon faith. Are there parallels there?
There are, because Smith used to say that he could take it, certain minorities could take it, but America couldn't take it. And the point that Smith wanted to make was that it's un-American, and that was kind of a catchy thing to say at the time, to be intolerant. And Smith went out there as a Roman Catholic, as Irish, as from Tammany Hall, the big city from the East. He had all these things stacked against him, but they were made worse with the press of the day, with the whispering campaign. And unfortunately, they took it out on Smith, who would have been a fantastic president. A lot of his programs were picked up by the New Deal. Many of the programs in social welfare today and labor law are still Smith ideas. So Smith did get unfairly treated, and I think the intolerance part of the whole campaign is something that Smith really detested, and he would probably say the same today, is you can't judge a person by his religion, his race, his creed. You judge him by his programs, by his willingness, his ability to lead, and that was Smith's whole program.
And he also, I mean, one thing that probably didn't do him too much good was he had a very thick 1920s New York accent. I mean, you know, I think people have said they don't talk like that anymore, but, you know, this was just as radio was kind of getting a foothold across the country, and people heard this very honking, very thick New York City accent.
Well, Smith wasn't the Hollywood-like Ronald Reagan type
He was not a good-looking
candidate.
guy. No.
He was not one that in today's media-driven age that he would, first of all, you mentioned his voice. It was raspy. It was very gravelly. He accentuated some of the accent as a joke, but he did have that thick New York City accent. He was a short man. He came across as, I guess you could say, not the polished person like you would have today. He was an actor as a youth, which was interesting, which helped him when it came to speak before people and in front of people. He was very much at ease. But his voice and his appearance and some of his mannerisms were foreign to those people that were outside of New York City. Mm-hmm. And to them, that was something as foreign as European to them.
Yeah, what's interesting about Smith and this C-SPAN series where they're looking at people who ran for president, lost, they were their party's nominees, lost, but had a lasting impact on national politics and on history. What's Al Smith's lasting impact, and what imprint did he leave on politics?
Well, Smith's lasting impact is social welfare. Smith bridged the gap between the late 1890s and the progressive movement and the New Deal. He had those first cracks in the foundation of the old state Americanism of laissez-faire, hands-off, business, private sector, and he realized that for America to be successful, it had to help those who were most in need. And that, flowed from the welfare law, the labor law, from parks and recreation, from rent control, all the things that he experimented with and got improved and enacted in New York State formed the starting off, and even Roosevelt credited him for this, the starting off.
Well, he and Roosevelt had something of a rivalry between the two of them.
They did later on. At first, Smith was a big proponent of Roosevelt. He talked him into running for governor in 1928. Roosevelt had thought about waiting a little bit before he made a run. But all of those programs that Smith experimented with, Roosevelt took and kept in place in New York State, as did Herbert Lehman after him, and Roosevelt took them and some of Smith's people to D.C. So the New Deal has some of its origins in Al Smith.
We've seen so many New York governors run for president and lose, not do too well. I think the last New York governor who became president was Franklin Roosevelt. Nelson Rockefeller tried to get the party's nomination 3 times, failed. Mario Cuomo, George Pataki have both thought about it. There's something about being the governor of New York that kind of makes you automatically a national figure. Why haven't we seen a New York governor elected president in recent years?
In recent years, they're always a candidate. No matter who the governor is, they're always a potential candidate for President of the United States if you're the governor of New York. That's just how it's always been. It probably will always be that way. We're one of the largest states, the financial center of the United States, tremendous manufacturing, including tremendous manufacturing high-tech that's coming back, a tremendous agricultural state. And, of course, it's 19 million people. So whoever's the governor of New York State is a candidate. In the past, we had a lot fewer states, a lot less popular states. New York State was a Republican state for so many decades that immediately they had an impact on the Republican nomination. It has since become more of a Democratic state, and then we saw the people like Al Smith and FDR run. But it's really just luck of the draw. We have people that enter the primaries all the time. Maybe we'll have some more candidates in the future.
Maybe it'll be Andrew Cuomo.
Very well could be. He's the governor.
Well, I love this stuff. We could go on and on and on about it, and I wish we could, but unfortunately we're out of time. This panel discussion is tomorrow at what time?
It's 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
It's from the Assembly Chamber. It's on C-SPAN.
Very good. Well, check your local listings for that. John, thanks very much for coming on.
All righty.